Chapter 17. Southern Sudan, 2009. What do you think we're building here? Naya's father asked, smiling. A house? Naya guessed. Or a barn? Her father shook her head. Something better, he said. A school. Naya's eyes widened. The nearest school was half a day's walk from their home, and Naya knew this because Deep had wanted to go there, but it was too far. A school, she echoed. Yes, he replied. With the well here, no one will have to go to the pond anymore, so all the children will be able to go to school. Naya stared at her father, her mouth open, but no words came out. When at last she was able to speak, it was only a whisper. All the children, Papa? The girls too? Her father's eyes grew brighter. Yes, Naya, the girls too. Now go fetch us some water, and he returned to his work, scathing the long grass. Naya went back and picked up the plastic can. She felt as though she were flying. School. She could finally learn to read and write. Sudan and Rochester, New York, 2003 to 2007. Salva stood at the foot of one of the beds in the crowded clinic. Hello, he said. Hello, the patient replied politely. I have come to visit you, Salva said. To visit me? But who are you? You are Mawin Dut Eric, aren't you? Yes, that's my name. Salva smiled and his insides trembled. Even though his father looked older now, Salva had recognized him right away, as if it was his eyes needed help from his ears. He needed to see his father's words to believe he was real. I am your son. I am Salva. The man looked at Salva and said, No, it's not possible. Yes, Salva said, it's me, father. He moved to the side of the bed, and Mawin Dut reached out and touched the arm of this stranger. Salva, can it really be you? Salva waited. Mawin Dut stared for a long time. Then he cried out, Salva, my son, my son. His body shaking with sobs of joy, he reached up to hug Salva tightly. It had been almost 19 years since they had last seen each other. Mawin Dut sprinkled water on his son's head in a Dinka's way of blessing someone who was lost and found again. Everyone was sure you were dead, Mawin Dut said. The village wanted to kill a cow for you. That was how Salva's people mourn the death of a loved one. But I wouldn't let them. I never gave up hope because I thought you were alive somewhere. And my mother, Salva said. His father smiled. She's back in the village. Salva wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. I must see her. But his father shook his head. There is still war near Loun Eric, my son. If you went there, both sides would force you to fight with them, and you must not go. There was so much more talk, his father told Salva, that his sisters were with his mother, but his 3 brothers, and the only ring, had survived the war. Eric, the oldest, and Cool, the youngest, were both dead. Little Cool, Salva closed his eyes for a moment, trying to picture his brothers through the haze of time and grief. He learned more about his father's illness. Years of drinking contaminated water had left Mawin Dut's entire digestive system riddled with guinea worms. Sick and weak, he had walked almost 300 miles to come to this clinic, and barely alive by the time he finally arrived. Salva and his father had several days together, but all too soon it was time for Salva to return to America. His father would be leaving the clinic shortly, and the surgery that he had undergone had been successful, and he would be soon strong enough to make the long walk home. I will come to the village, Salva said, as soon as it's safe, and we will be there waiting for you, his father promised. Salva pressed his face tightly to his father's as they hung goodbye, their tears flowing and blending together. On the plane back to the United States, Salva replayed in his mind every moment of his father's visit and how his father had sprinkled the blessing water on him. An idea came to him, an idea of what he might be able to do to help the people of Sudan. Could he do it? It would take so much work. Perhaps it would be too difficult, but how would he know unless he tried? Back in Rochester, Salva began working on his idea. There were, it seemed, a million problems to be solved. He needed a lot of help. Chris and Louise gave him many suggestions, and Scott, a friend of theirs, was an expert in setting up projects like this one, like the one Salva had in mind. They worked together for hours and days, which grew into weeks and months. Along the way, Salva met other people who wanted to help. He was grateful to all of them. Even with their help, it was more work than he imagined. Salva had to raise money for the project, and there was only one way to do this. He would have to talk to the people and ask them to give money. The first time Salva spoke in front of an audience was in a school cafeteria. About 100 people had come to hear him. There was a microphone at the front of the room, and Salva's knees were shaking as he walked to the mic. He knew that his English was still not that good, and what if he made mistakes? What if the audience couldn't understand him? But he had to do it. If he didn't talk about the project, no one would learn about it, and no one would give money, and he would never be able to make work. Salva spoke into the microphone. Hello, he said. At that moment, something went wrong with the sound system, and the speakers behind him let out a dreadful screech. Salva jumped and almost dropped the mic. His hands were trembling as he looked in the audience, but people were smiling. kind of chuckling, and a few children were holding their ears. They all looked friendly, and seeing the children made him remember it was not the first time he had spoken in front of a large group of people. Years before, when he was leading those boys on their walk from the Ethiopian refugee camp to the one in Kenya, he called a meeting every morning and evening. The boys would line up facing him, and he would talk to them about their plans. All those eyes looking at him, but every face interested in what he had to say, and it was the same here. The audience had come to the school cafeteria because they wanted to hear him. Thinking of that made him feel better, and he spoke into the mic again. "Hello," he repeated, and this time only his voice came from the speakers. "I'm here to talk to you about a project for Southern Sudan." A year passed, then 2, then 3. Salva spoke to hundreds of people in churches and civic organizations. Would he ever be able to turn his idea into reality? Whenever he found himself losing hope, Salva would take a deep breath and think of his uncle's words. One step at a time, one problem at a time. Just figure out this one problem. Day by day, solving one problem at a time, Salva moved toward his goal.